Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Harry Glorikian. I give you a little bit of my background, a little bit more than maybe Joel did, but I was in the industry for about 18 years at different companies, including Applied Biosystems, numerous diagnostic companies. I then went and started a strategy consulting firm, which we grew to about 40 people, and 3 years ago I sold it to a private equity firm. And for the last 18 months, I've been spending my time on different boards of different companies, both public and private, and actually starting companies from scratch. We've gotten 2 companies off the ground, one in digital health and one in diagnostics. And I actually teach a course on how to commercialize diagnostic products, which I'm actually 3/4 of the way in trying to write a book to mirror the course to get that out there. By the way, there's a lot that has to go into a book like that. Way more words than I actually anticipated. So I'm going to try to get your attention maybe away from your screens for just a few minutes. I'm going to repeat a little bit about of what I said last night. I was invited to talk a little bit about how the healthcare system is changing, which I think is incredibly germane to actually getting something paid for, because if you don't understand how it's changing, you're really not going to get your product paid for. So we've had this wonderful system that's been developed called the, can you guys hear me, or do I need to stand over there? I tend to move a lot. I can't stand still too often. This thing called the Affordable Care Act, or when, as someone said earlier, when somebody wants to bash it, it's called Obamacare. And it's supposed to do 3 things. It's supposed to broaden access, improve quality, and lower costs. Now, that's being force-fed upon the providers and to a certain degree the payers, but more so the providers than anything else. And so you want to get your product paid for and you want to get it used. So whether we like it or not, you're right in this bucket. You are so, if you are not aligned 150% with how they're getting paid, your product's never going to make it into the system. No matter who says they're going to get paid, that they're going to pay for it, nobody's going to use it. So what I would say to you is the following: is you have to think about your products in this rubric. Do I need next to the mic again? Oh. Okay, I'll try to stand still. Am I on now? Am I on now? Good, thank you. Jesus, I've never had anybody tell me they can't hear me. It's usually my wife is telling me the opposite. She's like, you need to talk, you got to get your ears checked. So this trial and error-based and broad-based methodology that we've approached the market with, whether it comes to a therapeutic or a diagnostic or any type of tool, is dead for all intensive purposes. If we're not moving towards incredible evidence, both clinical utility and cost effectiveness, if you don't use those words when I sit down with you, I'm not sure it's worth continuing the conversation. Or targeting certain populations. And finally, what I would tell you is thinking about how you help the provider get to a better outcome so they get paid so they want to use your product. All those things have to be aligned. Now, why do I believe that that's the case? Because by 2018, the biggest payer in the entire system is going to move to an outcomes-based payment system. You want to make a nickel on every one of your widgets, the system is not going to care. I use it once, I use it twice, I use it 3 times. The system says, here's your $100. You live within the $100. So if that product is not going to optimize the outcome that the provider is using it for, whether it's a drug, a diagnostic, or a device, it's not going to fit into this new rubric. Now, I would tell you one of the biggest products you're going to see come down the pike is not the product itself, but the clinical decision support that drives a decision that the provider makes. So anybody that doesn't believe that the analytics is not a diagnostic product or in the future not going to be fully regulated, you have to think again. And actually the most value is going to come from that type of product. Somebody earlier talked about the consolidation that's happening. I think it was the first speaker that talked about the consolidation of healthcare. I talked about this last night, and I said, well, when you have this happen, it's like an industry. We go buy 5 companies and we merge them all together. What's the first thing we do? We streamline HR, we streamline payment systems, we do everything to streamline the system. So we have a purchasing department. It's usually this angry little guy who gives you a hard time when you're trying to sell him something. Welcome to the new healthcare system. You're going to have somebody that's going to make a decision, and you're not going to have 5 different devices because every surgeon wants to use something different. It's going to be one device, and everybody's going to use the same thing. So either you're actually going to make that cut, or you're out. You're either going to sell that drug, or you're out. Or you're going to provide that diagnostic that moves the needle, or you're out. It's not going to be, I'll find 2 or 3 guys in there and they'll keep me whole and I'll sell a little bit here and sell a little bit there. If you look at the way the country is being divided up, I think we're going to end up with about 25 IDNs around the country. There was a comment last night after my talk of we're going to end up with 1 IDN per state. 50 of them, academic at some point. The number is so small. And if we go here, I'm pretty sure that there's going to be a presidential candidate in the future that's going to run on the whole platform of we need a single-payer system because these guys are screwing all the patients because they're charging whatever they want because they own that area. So we will end up in a single-payer system, hopefully in my lifetime. You also have to think about how you share risk with these people, depending on your product, because they're taking on risk and they want you to take on risk with them. Now, you're seeing some of the larger companies like Boston Scientific and so forth stepping up and saying, you know, we'll set up a cath lab for you, we'll make sure that you never spend X amount of dollars per patient, blah, 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 blah. The interesting thing is, though, what nobody ever calculated was everybody's got to go to that cath lab and everybody's going to use a Boston Scientific product. So we could talk about that differently, but this is the direction of risk sharing, clinical utility, and cost effectiveness that the world is going into. If you do not understand this archaic system called the US insurance system, you really should in some way. I mean, you want to go work with a good consulting group or have your own internal group that you can work with that can help you figure out how you get your product paid for. But understanding this and understanding how it's going to change is incredibly important. But because what I can tell you is the following, is I don't know if I can go back. Once these guys do their consolidation, the next thing each one of them is going to do is think, why am I paying a private insurance company to do the paperwork and giving them about 35% off the top? I will start my own insurance company and pay for it myself. So you're going to have the provider be the insurer, which actually, when they've got those 2 pieces of data, they actually function way more effectively than when the insurer is separate. So all that being said is understanding this rubric, and I'm not going to go through all this detail. I'm going to actually try to keep us back on track and go to the fun part, which is the panel part, which is understanding how money flows. Who gets paid, how they get paid, what they're doing to get paid for. And again, if you are not helping the provider get to a better outcome, I guarantee you, even if you figure out how to get your product reimbursed, they're not going to use it because it's not helping them get to where they need to get to. This is no longer a fee-for-service world. We are in it right now, but I would tell you that somebody is standing across 2 plates, and those plates are starting to separate. And one side is actually getting a lot smaller. So at some point, somebody's going to step over onto this side because that's the safe place to be. And that's going to be value-based outcomes payment system. And understanding how the money goes from the left to the right is also incredibly important. Because depending on your product, because of the Affordable Care Act, there's been this thing developed called high-deductible health plans that requires a patient to reach in their pocket, which they never had to before. All the patients used to walk around like this when it came to insurance. They could never reach their pocket because it was always paid for. Now they're reaching down in their pocket and they're saying, I actually have to pay for part of that service or that procedure. I think there was an announcement today from one of the insurers to everybody that said to the labs, you better go after the patient payment portion. Don't let that slip, because the patients have got to be on the hook for something. So if you actually have to pay for this out of pocket, I mean, those of us that work at or have worked at big companies where everything is covered, I don't know how long that's going to last, but that's an incredibly big benefit that you get. Everybody else in the rest of the world is paying for this, some of it out of pocket. Now, that's also a totally different business that's developing, which is forget getting reimbursed. I'll figure out a way to direct to consumer or have the consumer pay for it out of pocket. If I can make it in it, at the right price level and make my money off of it, that may be a completely different way to get to market, which we're seeing that develop in a number of different markets on digital health side and diagnostic side and direct to consumer sort of other methodologies. If you're going and you want to get a payer to pay for this, or CMS or anybody else that you're looking at in the world that actually is going to fork out money for it, you got to look at a number of different categories. It's some sort of approval or clearance, a technical assessment, the clinical guidelines, the advocacy, employer group support, a cost-benefit analysis, and the competitor coverage policies. But in reality, what you're looking at is very simple. Does that new product or therapy tip the scale on clinical response over the current standard of care? The days of a Me Too are becoming over so quickly, it's not even funny. I mean, it's happening at light speed, at least for healthcare. It's happening at light speed. It's not like technology of buying an iPhone, but we're moving pretty fast because the way that the providers are being paid is changing rapidly. So the faster that occurs, the faster that they're going to shift to looking at products that get them to where they need to be. So you got to ask yourself these questions. Is the current standard of care to the target patient population regarded as effective? Is there a significant improvement? Do I get a better clinical response? Is what I'm doing quantifiable and compelling? And you've got to do the work to get there. Most of the time I talk to people, they're like, Harry, you realize that's expensive to do that work. I said, well, if you actually don't spend the money, you've got nothing. So you got to make it part of if you're going to raise money from venture capital, you better have that built into your plan to actually do that work. So it's a very simple ratio. Treatment costs, units of effectiveness, cost-effective ratio. Am I going to reduce so you've got two ways to get there. Either you lower your cost, so you fit into that model, which nobody really wants to lower their costs. I'm not familiar with too many companies that want to lower their cost. Or you increase your effectiveness. It's a sort of become a binary world. And again, trying to get one doctor to buy it in a big system versus anybody else, you're not even going to be allowed to go talk to that doc for the most part. You're going to have to go to a committee head. The committee head's going to bless it because they did their analysis, or you came to them with their analysis. Actually, that's what I usually recommend is don't expect them to know anything. They're basically standing there saying, teach me everything that I need to know about your product, which means you're spending all the money and all the time to get them to buy off on it. I think that's it. So we can go to the panel now. All right.